So in the first part of this unit, we're going to be talking about some of the neural controls of respiration. Keeping in mind that this builds, in the first unit of this course, we talked about the muscles and the different things that had to happen to inflate and deflate the lungs. So we talked about the primary muscle of inspiration being the diaphragm. You also have your external intercostals. And those have to work together to contract and open up the lungs to bring breath in. And then the relaxation of the diaphragm and those internal intercostals, kind of bringing that thoracic cavity back down to let that breath back out. These are going to be the neural controls that link up with our thoracic cavity, our diaphragm, our muscles, all of these different things to come together to determine like the pattern of our breathing, the rate of our breathing, and we're just going to kind of skim the surface of a couple of different things here, not too detail oriented, but enough that you guys kind of get a picture of the way that this all ties together. So the first PowerPoint, we're going to talk about the medulla and the pons, or pontine center. So just to kind of give you guys an overview of the brain, we're not going to focus on this part here, but if you come to the brain stem, you can see that there's the medulla and then the pons. So these are the centers that we're going to be focusing on for this PowerPoint, is just these areas in the brainstem. There's a lot of different reasons that we have to understand the neural control of breathing, but just one example of why we care about this area, or why we'd want to know a little bit about how this works, is we do take care of all of the traumas that come in. And when you think about the different things that can happen with traumas, such as spinal cord injuries or traumatic brain injuries, these areas can be affected, and they can alter their breathing patterns or not have the ability to breathe on their own for a while. So then that's where we come to really support that breathing with either a ventilator or other interventions. So anyway, the pons and the medulla are where we're focused for this PowerPoint. So within the medulla is the medullary respiratory center. So this is kind of what determines our rhythmic cycle of breathing. So when you think rhythmic cycle, think our tidal breathing, our tidal volume, our normal breathing. You have higher brain centers, systemic receptors, reflexes, all kinds of different other things that kind of work with this medullary respiratory center to alter and fine-tune your breathing pattern. But this is really what kind of originates that tidal breathing. There's no really truly separate inspiratory and expiratory centers. It's not like you have one part of your brain that's for inspiration, one part of your brain that's for expiration. You kind of have all of these different impulses and sensory information coming together to create your breathing pattern. There's two respiratory groups or neuron groups that we're going to talk about in the medulla, and they're the dorsal and ventral respiratory groups. So dorsal just refers to, hang on, let me get the picture up here. So this is again just showing you the medulla, and then you have your pons, and then this is going to be your dorsal respiratory group, and this is going to be your ventral respiratory group. Now I know that this says inspiratory and expiratory area, but they really do overlap, and there's not really as much of a separation as what shows on this diagram. They are kind of entwined. Now your dorsal respiratory group, or your DRG, those ones are all your inspiratory neurons. Your ventral respiratory group, or your VRG, are your inspiratory and expiratory neurons. But they do kind of link together. They're not completely separated. And then, so this is your medulla, and then up here is your pons, and within your pons you have this apneustic area and this pneumotaxic area, which we're going to talk about in a second. So this is just so you have kind of a visual moving forward here. And again, sorry, I'm such a diagram person. I really feel bad for anybody who doesn't learn off of diagrams. This is, again, the pons, and this shows that pneumotaxic center and that apneustic center, which we're going to focus on later in this PowerPoint. And then this is your medulla, or your medullary respiratory center. These are your dorsal respiratory group neurons, and you can see them right here, and your ventral respiratory group right here. The dorsal group has all inspiratory neurons. The ventral group has inspiratory and expiratory neurons. The other thing too, just bringing you back to kind of your AMP, dorsal is the backside, and I always remember that because I think of like a dorsal fin of like a dolphin or a shark, and the dorsal fin is always on the back. So the dorsal side is on the back and the ventral side is on the front. So this is kind of the belly side and this is the back side. I don't know if that works for everybody, but that's how I always can remember which one is which. So again, the medullary respiratory center has these dorsal respiratory groups. So it's composed mainly of inspiratory neurons. It's located on both sides or bilaterally in the medulla. These neurons send impulses to motor nerves of the diaphragm and external intercostals. So we talked about those two being your primary inspiratory muscles. So this is what's going to send impulses to make those kind of fire so that you can take your breath in. The DRG nerves do extend into the VRG, so that's kind of what I meant where they're not really separate. The vagus and glossopharyngeal nerves are what bring those sensory impulses from the DRG to the lungs, airways, peripheral chemoreceptors, joint proprioceptors, which we're going to talk about later. That is not something that I'm going to expect you guys to know. You don't need to know the pathway. I'm not going to make you memorize the vagus nerve or the glossopharyngeal nerves. I'm just trying to take you through from the brain to your body how these communication patterns happen so you guys can kind of picture it in your brain. As far as for the exam, I do want you to know the DRG and the VRG groups and what they're made up of. I want you to know where they're located and essentially a little bit of what they do. So your VRG contain both inspiratory and expiratory neurons. They're located as well bilaterally in the medulla. The VRG are going to send your inspiratory impulses to like your laryngeal and pharyngeal muscles, also your diaphragm and external intercostals. Other VRG neurons can be responsible for sending those signals to your abdominal muscles and internal intercostals to kind of start that exhalation because they have both the inspiration and expiration neurons within one center. So again, we're not going to really delve into this. This is not a main concept that I'm going to really lock in for you guys. Just kind of having a scratch the surface understanding of this would be fine. So then we move to the Pons. Within the Pons, there are two pontine centers that we're going to talk about. The pneumotaxic center, what is on this PowerPoint is all you guys are going to be responsible for, but kind of understanding that the Pons is what's going to fine-tune your medullary center. So your medullary center is sending out these signals, and this is going to kind of hone them or make them a little bit more rhythmic, I guess. So for the pneumotaxic center, that's what's going to limit your inspiration. So as you're taking a breath in, this is going to be the center that decides, okay, that's enough of a breath. We're going to stop that. Help to control your breathing pattern. Your apneustic center, this is going to send stimulus directly to your DRG, and it will delay the switch off of the inspiratory ramp provided by the pneumotaxic. So that can get kind of tricky, but basically if your pneumotaxic center is to shut off your breath, your apneustic center can sometimes send stimulus to continue taking a big breath in. Why would we want to do that? There might be a situation where you're trying to take a larger breath in, like a yawn, right? And so what actually finally gets this signal to say, okay, that's enough of a big breath, we want to be done with this breath in, is that there's these pulmonary receptors in your lungs that can sense pulmonary stretch that will tell the apneustic center, okay, that's enough. We can now exhale. That's enough of a breath in. And again, this is not something that we're going to delve in great detail or great understanding. It's pretty limited what I want you to know about this. So all of these come together to create your inspiratory ramp signal. So if you think about how you take a breath in, you're not just going like super fast and spastic. Your breath is slow and smooth, and it kind of like gradually builds on itself. And that's because these DRGs send out a small signal and then it gradually builds and it makes almost this ramp-like inhalation. You also have your apneustic center, your pneumotaxic center, your response to CO2, your joint receptors, your pulmonary stretch receptors, and we're going to talk about these as we move through, but you have all of these different things in your body coming together that essentially collaborate to design your breathing pattern. So for restful breathing, you do have this DRG inspiratory ramp slowly building signal so you have a smooth breath. Then that pneumotaxic center is going to come in and it's going to switch it off. And then it'll start again. So that's really all you need to know for this PowerPoint for these kind of structures. And then these are your 2 lecture questions. That's it, short and simple. If you have any questions, as always, please feel free to email me.